Hello everyone! Okay, last episode we made it where we can actually set videos and pictures on our different layers, including the background, the cinematic, and the foreground. So now that we have that in place, let's go ahead and take a moment and add this functionality to our command manager. That way we can run all this through dialog files as well. So of course, like everything else, when we want to add commands to our command manager, we want to come into the command database extensions and add a new extension type. Since we'll be working with the graphic panels, that's what we'll call this one. CMD Database Extension Graphic Panels. With this new class, let's make sure that we encapsulate this into the commands namespace, and make sure that we inherit from the CMD Database Extension class, and of course implement the static function called extend. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and add our command. This is going to be done through an IEnumerator, that way we can wait until it's finished, of course. So there are a couple different ways that we could do this, and it all depends on how you would like to write your functions and what may be more natural. First of all, you could reference the panels in the command name. So we could do set background, and then provide maybe the image or the video that might go on that. And we could also do set cinematic, and which will automatically associate the command to the cinematic layer, and of course take in the image, video, and whatever other parameters that we might be using. The other way that we can do this is just by not creating separate functions for each of these different panels, but putting them all in one. So set layer, and maybe we could set layer image, and we could also do a set layer video. Or maybe we could encapsulate those two into the same function and just figure out if what we're trying to load is an image or a video. And we could do that by using set layer media instead. And then just pass in the image or the video, as well as the layer that we might be working with. So this might be a more compact way, instead of having to make commands for each one of these. And I think that's the way that I'm going to go. I'm going to make one command that I can run that could be for any of the different panels. So let's see how we can do that. First off, we're going to need a function to run. And this is of course going to be an IEnumerator. So I'll start with a private static IEnumerator, which will be called set layer media. And we're going to take in a string array for the data, since this may have many parameters in it. And then we just need to add a command that uses that to our database. So we'll say database.add command, and we will add a command called set layer media. Again, remembering everything is case insensitive by setting these to lowercase. And what we're going to use is a new function, which is taking a string array for the data, and it is a IEnumerator type. And that will be running set layer media. So for this function, there are a couple things that we can populate in the data. First of all, we're going to need to know what panel that we're assigning the media to, so we need a string for that. And since our panels can have multiple layers to them, we'll also need to know if we're specifying a specific layer. Then we need to figure out what the media is that we want to load on it, as well as the transition speed, whether this is an immediate effect or not. If we're using a blend texture, what is the name of that blend texture? And if the media that we're running is a video, should we use the audio of that video? All of these parameters will be things that we'll fetch in a minute and try to see if that's something that we can apply to the command that we'll run. So let's say that we're setting the layer on the background and we're using layer 0. Then the media that we might want to load, we're not going to specify the full path, but the path is something that we want to we'll need for resources to load the media, first of all. So we need to figure out what the path is to that media. Now, we can pass in the graphics simply by the name. So if we wanted to pass in maybe, I don't know, I have no idea what these things are called, again. Abandoned house, which I know we don't have one, so I don't know why I chose that name. But let's say we want to load abandoned house on as the media. If we just pass in the name, then we'll need some kind of default location. So we'll have a default location, but we can also specify paths. So we can have paths in the actual graphic name, which will then let us route further inside of the resources folder to find particular images that we want if we categorize them within folders. And the file path is going to need to be passed into the function, that way we can save it once we actually run our save system. So we're going to need a reference to that. String path to graphic will just be empty right now. And then, since we don't know Well, we're going to be loading the graphic just off of the name right off the bat, so we're not getting it as an image or a video, we're just getting it as a string right now. So we'll need to grab it as an object, and then we'll figure out if it's a video or an image. So let's cache whatever we load into an object type of Unity engine.object, and we'll call this the actual graphic. And just in case we're using a blend texture, we'll also cache blend text into a blend texture space. So, like I said, we need to get the panel first, and the order that we get the parameters is the order that we can pass in the data if we don't even specify the identifiers for them. So we're going to first specify whatever panel that we're trying to load. So we'll go parameters.tryGetValue, and we'll try to get something with a identifier for a panel. So let's come up to the top real quick and make a private static string array called param panel. And this will equal a new string array with just 2 items in it, like we normally do. It'll be -p or -panel. And so we'll try to get the value of param panel and cast it out to the panel name. And we need to make sure that panel exists, so we'll go ahead and get the graphic panel manager dot. Let's try to grab the instance dot get panel, and we'll go ahead and grab the panel name. And so let's just say that our graphic panel equals that. And if our panel equals null, then we'll go ahead and yield break, after logging a message letting us know that that panel was not able to be loaded because it doesn't exist. Next thing we want to try to load is we want to get the layer on the panel that this might be applied to. Again, we need to make a little string for our other identifiers here. So I've set up these different parameter identifiers for our layer, which is L and layer, as well as our graphics, speed, immediate, blend text, and use video audio. That way we have all of these identifiers that can be used for each one of our parameters. And then that frees up us the ability to actually go ahead and specify those. So since we're trying to get the layer, we'll go ahead and use param layer, out layer, and we'll specify that the default value is going to be 0. So if we don't specify a layer, it's automatically going to try to apply it to the only layer on the panel. Next thing we're trying to get is the graphic, or the media, and I went ahead and renamed that parameter to media, and we're casting it out into the media name field above. That media is just -m-media instead of -g for the graphic. Next, we want to see if this is an immediate effect or not. So we'll go ahead and try to grab that, and by default it's not going to be immediate, so by default we'll be just transitioning the new media in. Next, only if we're not using an immediate transition, let's try to find the speed of the actual transition for this media. We'll cast it out and just set the default value to 1 if we don't specify it. Next, after that, we're going to grab the blend texture if we decide to blend in the media. And lastly, if what we're loading is a video, then let's go ahead and try to find whether we're using the video, and just set that as a default to false if we don't specify it. Because if we're using a video as a background, we're probably not going to use the audio with it, but we'll use a separate ambient track. Okay, and now we can go ahead and run the logic that will actually get our media playing on the panel and the layer that we're specifying. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to get the actual path to this graphic. So let's make sure that we assign path to graphic to equal the output of a function that's going to give us the correct result. So the reason we're going to do this is because I want to make it where we can also reach into a different directory inside of resources. So we can go anywhere we want without having to be limited to the default location for graphics and images and videos. So real quick, we'll go ahead and make a private string called get path to graphic. And inside we're going to take a default path, and then we're going to take a graphic name. Okay, so path to graphic is going to equal get path, whoops, this has to be private static, forgot about that. Everything needs to be static here. So path to graphic equals get path to graphic, and we're going to get our graphics and images maybe. Not really, but we'll change that in a second. That would just be an example of our default path, and the graphic name that we want to grab is just going to be graphic name, or what was it? Media name. It was media name from the parameters that we snagged above. Okay, so in here, let's just go ahead and return the default path plus the graphic name, and we'll add a little more to that later. So if we go ahead and try to grab a graphic, then when we run abandoned house, it's going to search by default in graphics, images, abandoned house, and it should find it there. So the very first thing that we want to check for is we want to check if this is an image. So we'll try to find it as an image first. If we don't find it as an image, then we'll try to find it as a video. So let's go ahead and say that graphic equals our resources dot load, and we're going to load it as a texture type. And we're going to load it from the path to graphic. Okay, so that will try to get it as an image. But if at this point graphic equals null, then we know that we did not find it. So let's go ahead and try to get it a different way. So we'll go ahead and make a new path to the graphic, which instead of graphic images will be graphics videos. Do I have those paths right? I don't think I do. Okay, yeah, so it's graphics and then BG images and BG videos. So let me quickly correct that. BG images if we're looking for an image, and BG videos if we're looking for a video. And then we can go ahead and try one more time and say graphic equals resources.load, and we'll try to load the video clip for this asset at the path to graphic. Okay, so we try to load it as an image first, doesn't work. We try to load it as a video, and then let's see. So if our graphic is still null, then we know we didn't find anything. So we'll go ahead and log ourselves a warning or an error, and just let ourselves know that it did not work. And if that does not work, we're going to, of course, yield and break to exit out of our coroutine. That's if we don't have a graphic. If we do, then we can go ahead and proceed on to actually make this appear on the screen. Now, we need to see if we're going to blend this texture, which means we need to try to grab the blend texture if we specified one within the parameters. But we only need to do that if it's not an immediate effect, because if it is, then we're not going to see the blending transition anyway. So let's go ahead and check if not immediate and our blend text name is not equal to string.empty. So if we have a blend text name and we are not using an immediate transition, then let's go ahead and say that blend text equals resources.load, and we need to load a texture from the blend textures space within resources. And that's going to be something, I believe it's graphics and transition effects. So graphics, transition effects, and then plus our blend text name. Now, we are not going to have these just thrown in here hard-coded strings like this. We're going to be reusing these obviously for other spaces, and let's make ourselves a centralized point where we can load these. Not even within this particular script, but within a different script. You may remember that we have a script called file paths. This is inside of the script's core IO folder, and it's file paths, something that we made earlier. And what's inside of file paths is just one little path, which is the application data path and game data. That path isn't really being used right now. It will be for when we have runtime generated files, but now we can go ahead and add in a couple other paths, and we'll just go ahead and do that for the paths for these graphics that we're trying to load in. So I'll make ourselves a little header here called resources paths. And here are going to be all the paths to our resources items. First of all, we need to make sure they're public and static. And then I'll have a read-only string, and this will be for the resources underscore graphics. So this is the graphics folder that has the images, videos, and transition effects within resources, and that is simply graphics, followed by the /. Okay, so that's the directory and resources. Then we need one for the images, the videos, and the transition effects. And we can do that making them read-only strings, so that way they can't be edited, and assigning them to that resources graphics default directory, in addition to those subdirectories containing the BG images, the BG videos, and the transition effects. That way we have all these paths ready for us to load from anywhere. Which means in this function where we're creating our set media command, we can remove the images reference here and instead use file paths dot resources background images. So that will be the default path for images. And then we can do the same thing as file paths dot resources, but we'll use background videos. And for our blend texture, we'll go ahead and say file paths dot resources and blend textures. So we're loading them all from that centralized space, and if we want to change any of those file paths, all we have to do is come to this file paths script and then change anything from right within here. And we'll come back and move some of the directories in the other scripts, some of those base root directories, right in here. That way we have a centralized location where we can manage all the file paths within our system. But now that takes care of that. So we will have loaded our blend text if we're using one. And now it's time to try to get the layer. So let's try to get the layer to apply the media to. And we'll store this in a graphic layer, or this will be the GL, we'll call it GL. No, I'll call it a graphic layer. And call this panel.getLayer. And we're going to grab the layer from the layer that we've specified. If it does not exist, yes, we are going to create it and make sure that it does exist. And now we can go ahead and try to figure out if this is a texture that we've loaded or if it's a video, and call the correct command on the graphic layer to apply it to the screen now. So we can do that real quickly by saying if graphic is texture. If it's the texture type, then we're going to go ahead and say yield return our graphic layer, not the class name, the graphic layer dot set texture, and we're going to pass in the graphic as a texture, and we'll pass in the transition speed, and we'll also pass in the blend texture and the path to the graphic. Joomla, why is this underscored? Cannot implicitly convert void to object. Yes, and that is because our set texture is not actually a coroutine return type, it's a void. So when we created this function, we just kind of started the coroutine, allowed it to create the graphic on the screen, but we didn't create a way for it to keep track of it. So we need to make sure that we do that right now. So let's go to set texture, and if ever you want to just jump between scripts, just hold down Control, hover over the class or whatever it is, click it, and it'll take you right to it, whether it be a variable, a class, or a function. Okay, so set texture is a void type. We want to make sure that if we want to track this, then what this is doing is it's creating a graphic, and when it creates a graphic, ultimately it returns fade in, which is a coroutine, and that will fade in the graphic once it's built and basically let us keep track of it. So when we set the texture, we want to go ahead and make sure that we are returning the coroutine type on all of these. So set texture and set video should all return a coroutine type. That way we can keep track of them. Inside of the set texture we're loading by file path, if the texture is not null, or if the texture is null and we don't get it, then let's just return null. And for these other ones, well, we need to come, actually for down here we can also say return set texture and then return set video. Okay, so those two are ready. Now these two, set texture and video with the direct media reference, they're going to call create graphic. So create graphic also needs to return a coroutine to keep track of it. So now let's go ahead and return create graphic in these two. And our set texture and set video functions are ready. If we look at the graphic panel, we can notice that now we are not getting an error, but we're still not technically returning a coroutine. Because if we come into create graphic, it is trying to return the right type, but it's not actually getting something. Not all code paths return a value. So all we need to do is just return fade in. So return current graphic.fade in, just like that. So in our graphic panel, now all those functions are grabbing the coroutine that's generated when we create the graphic, and it'll return it back to us and let us know when it starts and when it's completed. So if it's a texture, load it as a texture. Otherwise we need to yield return graphic layer dot set video, and we'll pass in the graphic as a video clip. And for this one, we're going to still use the transition speed, and we're also going to pass in the use audio variable there, just in case we're using the audio of this video. Next thing we need is our blend text and the path to the graphic. And all looks well in the world, but you may notice that we are not actually doing anything with the immediate effect. If we set an image to transition in immediately, which means immediately set it on the screen, nothing is actually happening here because we haven't put in place in these functions a way to immediately apply that graphic. So as a last parameter, let's also pass in immediate. Which means at the end of these functions, we just need to go in and add a boolean immediate equals false right off the bat. So we'll tag that onto the parameters of all of these set texture and set video functions within our graphic layer, and also into the create graphic. So when we call create graphic, let's also pass in immediate as well for set texture and set video. Now we get an issue here in set texture where blending texture is out of position followed by an unnamed argument. So if I'm passing in this, I also need to specify the name of the function that immediate is being applied to. The reason for that is if we look at the parameters, then we have the graphic data, and we have the transition speed, and then we have a file path, and then we're skipping right past use audio for video and going to blending texture. So we need to specify what that is. And that just means we need to also specify anything that comes after that. So immediate is immediate, and that clears up the error. Now, when we create this graphic, we're creating it invisible by default. And then we have to call in fade in order for it to transition in the opacity. So if we want an immediate effect on this, it doesn't make any sense for us to try to fade it in. So therefore, our immediate effect needs to be applied to wherever the initial alpha is applied to the graphic, which would be in the constructor for the graphic object. So as a final parameter in both of these, let's also pass in immediate to know what our starting alpha should be, whether 0 if not immediate, or 1 fully opaque if this is immediate. So it'll immediately be visible on the screen. Now, let's hop into graphic object, and we need to apply the bool immediate on there to both the one that we use for the texture and the video. And for us to apply the alpha based on whether this is immediate or not, we do that inside of init graphic. So we'll notice init graphic comes down at the very end and sets the float of the blend and the alpha to 0 to make it fully transparent on start. So we need to figure out what the immediate factor is. So we need to pass that in as a parameter here. So immediate, and then we'll just go ahead and evaluate this. So our float starting opacity equals if it is immediate, then it will be 1 where it's already visible, or it will be 0 where it needs to fade in. So that just means that whenever we call init graphic, we just need to pass in immediate. And there we go. So back in create graphic on our graphic layer, we have gone ahead and we have made these visible to how they should be, whether this is immediate or a transitioning effect. So if it's immediate, it doesn't make sense for us to try to fade in. Therefore, we should only fade in if we are not using an immediate effect. But we still need to return something. So if we have not, then we will reach this space. If it has reached this space, then we know we need to destroy the old graphics, so that way this is the only active one on the panel, or the layer. So let's go ahead and destroy the old graphics, and also return null. There we are. And with that in place, we have a function where we can now set the layer media for images and videos, as well as specify all these different parameters to configure it for us. So that function again is called setLayerMedia. So let's try adding that into our test file and run that in Unity. I'm going to try to set the background to the barracks here. So for us to do this, first of all, I'm going to go ahead and right off the bat wait for 1 second, and using our wait command, and then I'm going to set the layer image for the background to the background called barracks, because it should start off automatically in the default location for all of our background images. And then I'm just going to create character Stella and go ahead and enable her, and then set her to immediately be visible. And then let's yield, whoops, I'm writing this like actual code. Let's go ahead and say Stella, and say, she's going to say something. She's going to say, welcome to the barracks. I forget the name of my own command. It's not set layer image, it's set layer media. So real quick, set layer media. Okay, wait a second. And there we go. We have now loaded the barracks. Now we also have that background called Nebula, which is that space background. So instead, I'm going to try to load Nebula and say, welcome to space. There we go. We have now faded into space. And of course, I could also set another one, so set layer media, and we're still going to do this on the background, but I'm going to do layer 1, and this is going to be the Nebula media. Oh, not Nebula. No, it's supposed to be a spaceship interior. That way we can load up this thing right on top of Nebula and be like we're looking outside of a spaceship. Here we go, and we have now the double layered panel for our background. And all looks good. Now, if I wanted to access the cinematic layer and set something right below the dialogue, we could go set layer, if I could ever type right, set layer media, and then instead of background, we just say cinematic, and then maybe do, for the media, it will be, this all needs to be in quotations for, good lord, I forgot what it's called. Okay, it's called Village Festival. Then as we go to that command, we are able to load the graphic directly onto the cinematic layer. But usually what the cinematic layer is for displaying gallery images. So like we display a certain scene, like these important pictures. Look at that. That's very important. So we need to show that right on top of the screen, and that's for the gallery. But that's not one of our default directories. So, you know, if I were to go ahead and specify flower in there, then it doesn't load. Instead, could not find the file called flower in the resources directories, because the only resources directories that we're checking are the images and the videos, and that's all that we need to check. If we wanted to show something on the gallery layer, then we could make a separate function called show gallery image, and then it would show up on the cinematic layer, or we can do something where we can specify a complete path within the resources folder. And we do that by identifying a home directory symbol that will default whatever we put directly within the resources folder, and we can navigate through from there to any other folder in the system. So for us to do that, we need to define a home directory symbol that will represent the root of the resources directory. So we can make ourselves a private constant string for the home directory symbol. And that is going to be equal to the squiggle, whatever you call that. I actually looked up what that was called one time, and I just forgot. But yeah, I think it's called the tilde or whatever. Something like that. So we get the home directory symbol, and then here's why we created this function, the getPath2Graphic. Now we can look for that home directory symbol in whatever we've provided, and go ahead and get the graphic straight from the resource's root, or we can grab it from the default path. So first of all, let's see if this is a complete path that we passed in. So if graphic name dot starts with, and we'll do the home directory symbol, then we're going to return the graphic name dot substring, and we're going to get it from the symbol dot length. Okay, so we could just do the tilde here, and we wouldn't need the forward slash, but in my testing, I think it just looks better, and it feels better when we write it out with a forward slash representing the root directory. Okay, so now we can actually get the home directory, or resort to one of the default locations. Which means when I try to load flower, now instead, I can say the root directory, then we go into graphics, and then we go into gallery, and then we load flower. And if we do that, let's go ahead and run the command, and we go straight into the gallery directory and load up flower. Now, let's go ahead and check out some of the other parameters that we're using. So we'll change set layer media to use fantasy landscape. And since that's 2 words, we don't want those as 2 different parameters. We'll have to encapsulate that within quotation marks. So set the background to fantasy landscape. And it'll go ahead and reach into the videos and pull that file. But you notice that we are not actually getting the audio. We know that that video has audio in it, so let's go ahead and try that parameter out to allow us to use the audio of the video. To do that, all we have to do is specify just the odd for this as the parameter, and set that to true. And when we do that, we get the audio playing through the video. We can also come through and try our speed as well. So speed will be 0.1, and we should really hear that audio fade in. And there we go. We can see, yep, the speed is working, and the audio is slowly fading in with it. Now how about a blend texture? Let's go ahead and try to specify a dash blend, and we'll just call it hurricane, since that's the only one I can remember. And I'm also just going to go ahead and set our speed to 0.7. There we go. All working nicely. Which means the only thing we need to test now is immediate. So right in the beginning, actually it doesn't matter where I put it, I'll just go ahead and stick it at the end. So I is going to be true as well, which means we are immediately transitioning this in. So neither the speed or the blend texture should make a difference, but it should become immediately visible and audible to us. But it doesn't. Let's see why. Let's see what I missed. And I had a feeling that's what I did. I specified starting opacity, but did not replace the actual starting opacity with that variable. So let's go ahead and do that. And for our video, we also need to go ahead and change the audio volume to use the correct amount as well. So we'll do a quick check here for immediate, and if it is immediate, we'll set it to 1. If not, we'll set it to 0. So that way the audio also starts where it needs to be. So now let's see. There we go. Immediately came in both audio and video. And that's all we're going to do for this video. In the next video, we'll go ahead and finish off the commands for this system, and we'll go ahead and clear the screen. That way we can clear out the layers and the panels and restore the graphics to whatever we're trying to display at that given time. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.